It was a hot, sticky night in Louisiana when someone's screams broke the silence. A young man, naked and tied up, was running through the streets, yelling for help. Chasing him was a man no one would have suspected, someone the neighbors thought was just quiet and polite. Some people peeked outside but stayed indoors, thinking it was just some kind of fight. The young man disappeared into the night. The man chasing him slipped back into his trailer. At the time, no one realized what had really happened, or that this was just the beginning of something much darker. A hidden monster was living among them, and it would take years before the truth finally came out. Ronald Joseph Dominic was born on January 9, 1964, in the small town of Thibodaux, Louisiana, tucked away in the swampy southern region of the state. He grew up in a large family, one of 7 children, with 6 brothers and 1 sister. Life in the Dominic household was harsh. Poverty was a constant shadow, and emotional support was scarce. The family's financial struggles and the stress of raising so many children created an environment where tension and neglect were part of daily life. From an early age, Ronald stood out, though not in ways that won him favor. He exhibited mannerisms that were considered feminine compared to his brothers and peers. A softer walk, a preference for spending time with girls rather than boys. In a community steeped in traditional gender roles, these traits made Ronald a target for ridicule and rejection, especially from his father. Their relationship was strained and cold. His father disapproved of Ronald's lack of manly interests, further deepening the emotional chasm between them. Though his bond with his mother was less hostile, she was overwhelmed by the demands of raising 7 children and struggled to provide Ronald with the affection and attention he needed. Alienation became a defining feature of Ronald's childhood, both at home and beyond. His brothers joined in the bullying, often hurling homophobic insults at him and reinforcing his isolation. One account even mentions that Ronald was made to live in a small trailer on the family's property, physically separated from the main house, a powerful symbol of his exclusion. School offered little refuge. Ronald faced relentless bullying from classmates, enduring insults, public humiliation, and physical intimidation. Despite his gentle and quiet nature, traits that might have shielded another child, he became a frequent target. One particularly painful memory occurred during high school when he attended a homecoming dance with a close female friend. Over the course of the evening, Ronald spent much of his time dancing with another boy, an act that didn't go unnoticed. The incident led to an escalation in the harassment he already endured, both verbal and physical. Perhaps the most devastating aspect of his early life was the sexual abuse he suffered at the hands of a priest. The abuse happened on at least 2 occasions and left profound scars on Ronald's psyche. When he bravely confided in his parents, seeking protection, they refused to believe him. Their rejection not only left him exposed to further abuse, but also shattered what little trust remained between Ronald and his family. Amid all this turmoil, Ronald came to understand his sexuality. He knew he was gay from an early age, but the oppressive, homophobic environment he lived in forced him to suppress his true identity. Fear of rejection and violence kept him silent, compounding his emotional burden. After graduating high school, Ronald sought a way out. He moved closer to New Orleans, a city known for its vibrant culture and comparatively welcoming LGBTQ community. For Ronald, it wasn't just a move. It was a desperate search for freedom, acceptance, and a fresh start away from the stifling judgment of Thibodeau. In his early adulthood, Ronald purchased a small trailer which became his home. Though modest, it represented his first taste of independence, a space that was wholly his, free from his family's suffocating influence. Yet, the trailer also reflected the continued financial instability that followed him into adulthood. He drifted between low-wage jobs and often relied on public assistance just to meet basic needs. Struggling economically for the first time as an independent adult took a toll on his self-esteem and placed him in an increasingly vulnerable social position. In New Orleans, Ronald began to explore his sexuality more openly. The city's bustling nightlife, filled with gay bars, clubs, and vibrant LGBT events, offered him a world that felt vastly different from the oppressive atmosphere he had known growing up. Here, for the first time, he could live more freely, without the constant fear of rejection that had haunted his childhood and teenage years. But integration into this new world was far from easy. Ronald was often described as socially awkward and, by conventional standards, physically unattractive. These traits made it difficult for him to form meaningful connections, even within the more accepting LGBT community. His insecurity and social discomfort only heightened his sense of isolation as he continued to feel like an outsider. In a bid to find acceptance, Ronald turned to the local drag scene, a vibrant subculture within New Orleans' LGBT community. Inspired by his love of music and his admiration for singer Patti LaBelle, he adopted Patti as his stage name. Yet his attempts at performing were met with disappointment. Lacking the charisma and confidence necessary to shine on stage, Ronald's awkward performances were met with mockery and rejection. What had begun as a hopeful path towards self-expression turned into another humiliating experience, further damaging his already fragile self-worth. Despite his efforts, Ronald struggled to build any lasting romantic or even platonic relationships. His appearance, financial limitations, and withdrawn personality worked against him. Trapped in a cycle of rejection, he began questioning his own value as a person. The overwhelming loneliness he experienced deepened into resentment and dark thoughts. Throughout this period, his economic hardships never eased. Without higher education or specialized skills, Ronald remained confined to poorly paid jobs that barely sustained him. His frugal, stagnant lifestyle only fueled his growing sense of hopelessness. Combined with his social alienation, the cumulative pressure slowly eroded his mental health. Emotionally, Ronald lived with a constant internal battle. He craved acceptance and love, but was repeatedly confronted with rejection and isolation. Over time, the combination of social failure, poverty, and deep loneliness turned into a dangerous emotional powder keg. Ronald's first documented brush with the law came in 1985 when he was arrested for making sexually explicit, harassing phone calls to several people in the region. Authorities were able to trace the calls back to him. Although serious, the offense was treated as a minor incident at the time. Ronald avoided jail time by paying a $74 fine. Few could have predicted that this would be the first small crack in a pattern of behavior that would escalate into far more serious crimes. By August 1996, Ronald's criminal behavior had taken a much darker turn. This second arrest marked a critical moment in his descent. That night, while driving through the streets of Houma, Louisiana, Ronald noticed a young man walking alone. Using his seemingly friendly demeanor, he approached the man and offered him a ride, promising marijuana to help coax him into accepting. Once Ronald lured the young man to his trailer, the situation shifted dramatically. In a sudden act of violence, Ronald attacked the victim, binding him with an extension cord to restrict his movement. He then proceeded to sexually assault him, despite the victim's desperate attempts to resist. During the assault, Ronald revealed a side of himself that few had ever seen: aggressive, domineering, and violent, a stark contrast to the polite, reserved persona he presented to the outside world. However, in a moment of carelessness, his victim managed to partially free himself. Despite still being naked and bound at the wrists with a cord, the young man made a desperate escape, diving through a trailer window and sprinting into the night. His screams for help pierced the darkness, attracting the attention of nearby residents. The scene was chaotic. A disheveled, half-bound man running through the streets, with Ronald close behind, trying unsuccessfully to prevent his getaway. Although neighbors emerged from their homes to investigate the commotion, most chose not to intervene, assuming it was a domestic dispute or a misunderstanding. Ronald's reputation as a quiet, respectful neighbor further discouraged immediate suspicion. Ultimately, the young man found help and reported the attack to local authorities, giving a full account of the abduction and assault, and identifying Ronald as his attacker. Within days, Ronald was arrested on charges of aggravated rape and kidnapping. His bail was set at $100,000, an amount he could not afford. As a result, he remained incarcerated while awaiting trial. The time Ronald spent in jail, roughly 2 to 3 months, left deep scars. Vulnerable and anxious, he became a target for brutal abuse at the hands of other inmates. The assaults were so severe that he required hospitalization and surgery. The trauma of his incarceration profoundly affected him, instilling a paralyzing fear of ever returning to prison. During his time behind bars, Ronald withdrew further, avoiding conflict and keeping a low profile in a desperate attempt to protect himself. When his court date finally arrived, a critical blow struck the prosecution's case. The victim failed to appear. Without the key witness, prosecutors were forced to drop the charges due to insufficient evidence. Despite knowing that Ronald had committed a violent crime, the justice system could not proceed without the victim's testimony. In 1997, Ronald Dominic's descent into violence escalated. His first known murder victim was David Mitchell, a 19-year-old who disappeared on July 13, 1997, after attending a birthday party at his grandmother's home. David, who often hitchhiked, accepted a ride from Ronald that night. A decision that cost him his life. He was never seen alive again. The next day, July 14th, David's body was discovered in a remote drainage ditch. The intense Louisiana heat and humidity had accelerated decomposition, complicating the forensic investigation. Nevertheless, examiners determined that drowning was the cause of death. Yet, the absence of defensive wounds and the strange circumstances of his death suggested there might be more to the story. Though investigators could find no clear evidence pointing to a suspect. 5 months later, on December 14, 1997, tragedy struck again. The body of 20-year-old Gary Pierre was found. This time, the cause of death was clear. Gary had been strangled. Like David, he showed no signs of defensive injuries, suggesting he had been subdued or caught by surprise. The eerily similar conditions surrounding both deaths stirred concern among law enforcement. While they lacked definitive evidence to link the cases, suspicions grew that a serial predator might be at work. Over the coming months, Ronald continued his lethal pattern. His victims, mostly young men, vanished from the streets of New Orleans and surrounding areas, while the community lived in mounting fear of the faceless predator among them. Despite increasing alarm, police struggled to connect the dots. Without concrete evidence, Ronald Dominic remained invisible, his violent spree continuing in the shadows. Despite witness reports suggesting that some of the victims had last been seen in bars and known prostitution areas, authorities struggled to draw a direct link between these sightings and a viable suspect. The murders continued, and in June 1999, another victim, 21-year-old Jerome King, was found dead in an industrial zone in Jefferson Parish. Like the others before him, Jerome had been sexually assaulted and strangled. His body bore no defensive wounds, further indicating how calculated and methodical the killer was. With each new body discovered, police grew increasingly convinced they were dealing with a highly organized serial killer. Yet, despite mounting fears and an accumulating body count, significant progress in the investigation remained elusive. The community lived in a constant state of fear while authorities found themselves trapped in a vicious cycle, similar crimes, but no concrete leads. However, the careful predator was beginning to slip. After a period of changing jobs and moving residences, Ronald Dominic returned to his predatory behavior. In 1999, he left his job at CoProduce and moved in with his sister. On the surface, he appeared to be settling into a more stable life, taking up work as a laborer. In reality, the danger he posed to the community remained as present as ever. In October 2002, Ronald struck again, this time murdering Kenneth Randolph Jr., a 20-year-old young man who lived near his sister's home. Kenneth was lured into Ronald's vehicle and was later brutally assaulted and strangled. His body was dumped in a sugarcane field in Lafourche Parish, yet another crime that initially slipped under law enforcement's radar. The investigation into the unknown serial killer took a critical turn thanks to the bravery of Ricky Wallace, a man who narrowly escaped becoming one of Dominic's victims. While under probation for a minor drug offense, Ricky confided in his probation officer about a strange and alarming encounter he had with Dominic. Ronald had lured Ricky to his trailer under the pretense of meeting a woman, but Ricky grew suspicious when Dominic attempted to tie him up. Sensing danger, Ricky managed to get away and later reported the incident to the police. Ricky's detailed account allowed investigators to connect Ronald Dominic to the series of unsolved murders. Further digging revealed that Ronald's movements matched the locations where several bodies had been found. Surveillance operations and further background checks intensified, and eventually, investigators secured a DNA sample from Dominic. Tests linked his DNA to evidence collected from one of the victims, Oliver LeBancs. Though the initial match was mitochondrial DNA, less definitive than nuclear DNA, it was enough to maintain heavy surveillance on him. On October 15, 2006, Ronald committed what would be his final murder. His last victim, Christopher Sutterfield, was bound, sexually assaulted, and strangled before being abandoned by the roadside. The brutality of this crime pushed authorities to act. They could wait no longer. On December 2, 2006, Ronald Joseph Dominic was finally arrested. Despite his frail appearance and reliance on a cane to walk, police knew they had captured the man responsible for at least 23 murders. Initially, Ronald denied involvement during interrogation, but as the questioning continued, he eventually confessed, admitting to killing all of his known victims. Although he attempted to frame the murders as acts of self-defense, claiming the men had attacked him, he ultimately admitted to binding and strangling each victim. Ronald explained his method. He would lure young men with promises of money or by showing a fake photo of an attractive woman, claiming he was looking for someone to engage in sex with her. Once he got them into his trailer and had them tied up, they were at his mercy. In some cases, he struck his victims with blunt objects, such as iron rods, before strangling them. Following his confession, Ronald was offered a deal. If he cooperated fully by revealing the locations of the victims' bodies and providing additional information about the murders, prosecutors would agree not to seek the death penalty. Ronald accepted. He led investigators to multiple sites where bodies had been dumped, allowing authorities to collect enough evidence to convict him. Out of the 23 murders attributed to Ronald Dominic, the police were able to prove 8 beyond a shadow of a doubt, securing 8 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Ronald Dominic was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. Some victims' families expressed anger over the plea deal, wishing he had faced the death penalty. However, others took solace in the fact that Ronald would live out the rest of his days in the very place he feared most, among the general prison population, where his frailty and crimes made him a constant target. To this day, Ronald Joseph Dominic remains behind bars, serving out his multiple life sentences. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.